All right, well, good morning, everybody, or good afternoon if you're tuning in from somewhere else in the world. Like I said previously, my name is Rae Sturm, and I'm a digital content manager at Croud. And today for this edition of Croud Academy Live, I will be talking about how you can pivot your content strategy. So let's get started. Today, we'll be talking about a few things. First, we'll be talking about the importance of having a flexible content strategy. Then we'll go into some red flags or warning signs that your content strategy might not actually be working for you. Then we'll go through a pre-pivot checklist, how to pivot, and looking ahead. So the importance of having a flexible content strategy. So a good content strategy should be flexible. So we all know the importance of actually having a solid strategy in place. However, that solid strategy is not really working for you if it's not able to be flexible in times of change. As digital marketers recently, we've all had to learn how to pretty much switch gears. A lot of us have actually had to stop, scrap everything that we have planned for the year and start again. And so, it's definitely proven that there is a benefit of being flexible for these ever-changing situations. Now, especially with COVID and really anything in life, there's a lot that's not necessarily in our control as humans, but as marketers, we actually can control the type of content that we're putting into the world and how we're communicating with our audiences and that relationship we can foster during those uncertain times. So during COVID, we've realized there's definitely not a one-size-fits-all solution. It's pretty much, brand for brand and what's best for their strategy overall. We've seen a lot of different brands actually transition to the products that they're making. We've seen fashion brands start making masks. We've seen distilleries start making hand sanitizer. Also, there's other brands like Woolworth here who has actually transitioned into integrating new shopping hours and new offerings for the disabled and elderly shoppers, just so they can get in a bit before the crowds. So like I said, it's not, a one-size-fits-all approach. You really need to think about what's best for your brand. And also, it really helps to understand your brand. So making sure that you have those clear brand guidelines and tone of voice guides set in place so you have those strong foundations. If you need to change, you're able to change. And obviously now is a good time to really reevaluate those brand guidelines and ask yourself, who your brand is in times of uncertainty or in times of global pandemics. Are you the lighthearted brand that's going to make people laugh and lift them up? Or are you someone that really takes action and takes a stance on certain issues or things happening in the world? So knowing all of those elements will really allow you to have a strategy that is flexible. Now, you need to be ready to form new relationships. So we're all different. I think the pandemic has impacted us in so many different ways, but definitely as media consumers. We're consuming media by up 60% more than before, and we're also spending up to 12 hours a day across various content channels. So we're spending more time online, we're consuming more content. And also that means that as marketers, there's more content being produced. So we really need to find who our audience is in this new pandemic type world and what are their new goals and values, because most likely they've changed slightly. To be frank, not many people are really excited about, buying new things. There's so much uncertainty in the world. So you really need to tap in to what your consumers are actually feeling. And honestly, as a marketer, you have to ask yourself, how can you help your audience, especially during these times? Also ask yourself if your audience is responding well to COVID-19 content. Are they enjoying these, mask hacks or different things that you can incorporate that, relate back to COVID-19 somehow? Or are they ready, to go back to business as usual content and really just kind of look past this whole thing and pretend like it's not happening? Once you understand, how your audience actually wants to be communicated to and the types of content that they're tapping into during these times, you'll have a better understanding of actually how to tweak your content strategy. And helping versus selling. So as much as, you know, our main link goal is at the end of the day conversions, we have to be conscious what our message is actually conveying. We can't appear tone deaf during these times, and a lot of the times it's not necessarily the right move to say buy our product. Obviously, there's a lot of brands that, you know, aren't able to actually promote their offering or their products like they were before the pandemic. Certain brands like travel brands, hospitality, etc., are just not even able to, you know, entice customers with those offers. However, they still have something to offer to their consumers, and that's through content and through that relationship they have with them. So basically, by being there with that content during these times, when your audience needs you and where they can find you, you'll build brand equity and honestly foster that big sense of customer loyalty that will in turn really come back and be beneficial when everything gets back to this new normal that we're looking at. So you really want to focus on finding these short-term solutions so it'll set you up for the long term and making sure that path forward is a little bit more clear. So a few red flags that, you know, you can look at and see that they're warning signs that your content strategy isn't necessarily working for you. And the first red flag is that your traffic isn't growing. So obviously, to start achieving your business goals, you need to reach a lot of people, and volume is one of the realities of building a qualified audience. That being said, you know, not everyone that comes to your website is going to be a converter or a future customer. And you need to really enhance the amount of people that you're bringing to your site so you can actually have a solid base of people that in turn convert. So if your traffic isn't growing, it can mean two different things. So number one, it could mean that your content just isn't reaching new people. And it could also mean that people who have read your content just aren't coming back for more. And most likely it's a combination of those two factors. So if your traffic isn't growing, that's one red flag of maybe it's time to rethink your content strategy. The second red flag is that your traffic isn't actually coming from search. So obviously, it's essential to know where the traffic to your website is coming from, whether that be through direct traffic, referring sites, or through Google. It's really important to understand where that's coming from, but most importantly, looking at this traffic that's coming from search is vital to understand if your content strategy is working. So obviously, to win at SEO, you have to play by Google's rules. I know Google is not the only search engine. However, today, if you're not playing by Google's rules, it's not going to work in your favor in the long run. So Google results 1 through 5 on that first page get about 67% of all clicks. So it's really important that you're actually appearing in the search engine result pages and you're visible to your consumers that might not have ever heard of your brand before. So obviously, as marketers, we need to be savvy and a little bit creative and make sure that we're achieving those results and appearing in that first page. And a lot of that goes into obviously playing by Google's rules in terms of user experience. I think a lot of people are really used to that keyword loading strategy that they had before. And it's a big sign because you know, you can tell that that's not necessarily working as Google has shifted different algorithm updates, for example, the BERT update and other recent ones, really putting the consumer and audience intent first and making sure everything is easily found for the consumer. So it's not just about keywords anymore. Number 3 is that your content isn't getting shared. So we all know that when we find a great article, whether it be something comedic, something informative, or just something worth sharing in general, we share it, and we, you know, share that with pride across any of our social networks, whether that be LinkedIn or on Facebook or Twitter, and you know, you get excited about it, and that's the type of thing that you want your content to actually evoke with your audience. So you want your audience to immediately want to share your content. As there's so much competition now with all of these marketers putting content out into the world, you really have to stand out from the crowd. And whether that be through creative content creation, informative content, you need to get noticed. And a big way to get noticed is through people sharing your content. Shareable content generates that traffic, which in turn generates more shares, which ultimately boosts your bottom line. So obviously start small and start just by looking at what content is being shared in general. What content are you yourself sharing as an individual? And then you can start looking at your competitors and see which of their pieces are getting shared more. So if your content isn't getting shared, maybe rethink your content strategy and think about how you can actually get more shares with that content. And you're not getting contacted is number 4. So good content gets people talking, it sparks conversations, and you really want these conversations eventually to turn into conversions. So even if you have a really small audience, that good content will engage them. And you obviously want people to talk. You want to have that opportunity to interact with your customers, and making sure that you get those comments, questions, maybe even arguments. Good content is sometimes controversial content. So, don't take that to heart. Don't stir up any controversies on your site. But it does really prove well when people start talking. And that's the goal of content, really. So if your content isn't sparking conversations, they might not see the value in what you're creating. So rethink that as well. Number 5, if your content isn't converting. So like I said previously, this is the big goal of actually having this big content marketing strategy. And as much as, the next content marketer and myself love to write, we know that writing for the sake of writing is not a content marketing strategy. You want to avoid at all costs having just copy on a page. So content needs to be developed and planned in such a way that each piece builds upon the other content that you've created. So you really want to make sure that at all stages of the funnel, users have content that they enjoy, that they're engaging with, that they potentially share, and that at every stage it's applicable and relevant to them. So like I said, that content should attract people, start conversations, and really, most importantly, develop those long-term relationships and that brand loyalty. From there, you can create these relationships into business. And the last one is number 6. If times are changing, it might be a sign that you need to rethink your content strategy. And this one is pretty much what everyone has had to do during this COVID-19 period that we've had for the past few months. Like I said before, users are behaving very differently, and everyone has different needs. So it might be a good idea to go back in time and look at what needs your customers have adapted during these new times and how you can actually speak to them. So finding new ways to get your message across that is not tone deaf and is not ignoring the fact that the world has really changed is really important. So if your strategy is solely focused on selling, it might be time to pivot. And really just think about this time to be a nice pause and a reset to tap into communicating with your audience. Rather than always telling them to buy something, think about how you can help them, think about how they're struggling right now, and that will really prove beneficial in the long run. And these are just some examples of different brands that have kind of done that. So we have the Guinness example with the simple message of just stay at home. And then we have Coca-Cola, the creative branding there with the letters all spaced out, social distancing, the staying apart is the best way to stay united. And Nike, who's done a fabulous job, especially with their video ads throughout this time. If you've ever dreamed of playing for millions around the world, now is your chance. Play inside, play for the world. Really moving. But these are just examples of how they've kind of paused from their marketing strategy and changed their message. So pre-pivot checklist. So before you say, hey, my content strategy is not working, let's just start new. These are a few things that you actually need to ask yourself because it might not necessarily be your strategy as a whole. So before you shift, make sure your problems are actually truly coming from your content and not a technical issue. So first ask yourself, is my content long enough? You want to find a balance between length and frequency, and quality in this case really trumps quantity. So the The important thing about creating content is it's not necessarily a fulfillment piece. Obviously, you do want to post frequently, as I'll talk about in a second, but you want to make sure that the content that you're posting is valuable, is insightful, and will get all the people that you're trying to target actually engaged, because they won't reward you for just posting every day. People don't act like that. Second, are you posting regularly? Now, like I said, quality definitely trumps quantity. However, Google does crawl your site more if you're posting frequently. So you want to make sure that you're still staying relevant and up to date. If you posted an article about COVID, say in March or February, and you haven't posted one since, it's probably not necessarily relevant anymore. And same goes for a lot of other different types of content. So you want to make sure that you're regularly posting at least a few times per week. Obviously depending on your budget and your resources. Also ask yourself, are you paying attention to SEO? So like I said before, make sure you optimize your site so people can actually find it, especially if they've never heard of your brand before. So if you're not paying attention to SEO, maybe rethink switching your strategy and start looking back at where you could actually enhance that SEO. And also, is your content good quality? This is a big one. If you are doing everything right, but your content is not optimized with clear headlines, actionable CTAs, imagery, make sure that you go back and you maybe refresh those pieces. You want to create the content that you yourself as a user would want to consume. So before you flip the strategy, ask yourself these questions. If these questions don't necessarily, you can't tick the box for all of them, maybe go back and revise some of those before flipping your strategy. Now, if you said, yep, doing all of those right, now it's time to shift. So how do we do that? Well, to move forward, let's first look back. So obviously you can always refocus, that's absolutely fine. And you need to look at actually what worked for you in the past. Even if your strategy as a whole isn't necessarily working well, there's probably some insight that you can see from previously published content. So look at the posts that created the most engagement and try to figure out that why. Ask yourself, is there any content that you created that keeps on getting traffic, that's continually bringing people to your site? And you need to find that content by going back in time, because that content will hopefully continue to perform. Looking at all those performing content pieces, you need to tie in what content has performed well and see what that common thread is, and integrate that into the new content that you're actually producing. You also need to find a new angle on the same type of content. So if your content is not necessarily relevant, say in a COVID-19 world, you still need to cover different topics and the same topics that you were covering before, but just spice it up a bit and make it as relevant as possible. So like I said, is think about how your customers' needs have changed and create content to actually meet those needs. And don't be afraid to think outside the box, try something that you've never tried before. Now is a really great time to think outside the box. People are more open to brands thinking outside the box. People are ready for new technology. People are ready for brands to jump to new platforms. So don't be afraid to try something new and get a little creative. And also look at what your competitors are doing well. See the content that they're coming up with during this time. And also just stay true to your brand. So obviously what your competitor does isn't necessarily what's best for you. It's just a good starting point. And now this example that I have on the page here is just what we did for one of our clients, Michael Page. So obviously recruiting has changed for jobs during COVID. And this is an article we produced for their advice section. And it's 5 technologies that increase work from home productivity. So this is just a nice tie-in to make your content strategy still move forward in the same way, but just take a different angle on it. Try also shifting the form. So there's so many different ways to convey a message and create value for those consumers. However, there are some formats that are more effective than others. Obviously, a lot of this depends on your budget and time constraints and resources, but think about how you currently convey and present your content and ask yourself, is there a better way to create it? Obviously, If you're cranking out blogs every week and you're following a similar theme or series, you could easily turn that into an ebook, and you could use that for lead generation. Or if you're continually showing graphs and statistics within your articles, maybe think of creating an infographic. Different types of content perform better, and you shouldn't be afraid to actually shift the form. The next thing you could do is adapt to changing times. So it's obviously okay to keep your regular content going. Be mindful though of the message and tone, as well as the imagery that you're presenting in your content. If you see people crowded around and touching each other at a barbecue and they're sharing food, probably not the best to be featuring within your content. You want to ask yourself in these changing times who you are as a brand and who do you want to be. And also do your research and understand, how to guide your users through a new customer journey. Before you start shelling out all of this content and thinking that you're changing it up, really sit down and get a strong foundation in place for how you plan to move forward. And adapt your message to make sure your product or service still aligns with what people want. You need to make sure that you're adding something to the world if you're publishing COVID-19 content especially. Just adding COVID-19 within a headline of your blog doesn't necessarily make it valuable to the user. So there's so much content being created, and there's so much bad content out there. And we've all seen it, and we've probably bounced right off the page. So make sure that you're giving your users something of value. Now this example is from West Elm, a furniture brand in America. And this is a really interesting way that they've adapted to the changing times. So they actually created this landing page for Zoom call backgrounds. And the box on the top is one of the options for the Zoom backgrounds. And it's this beautifully curated kitchen in the city. You have the option to either click and download that background, or you can actually click and see the full guide tour, which you see scrolling down below. And it's a really clever way to get their content out. But if you would have asked them probably last year, hey, should we be creating Zoom backgrounds? Everyone would have laughed, but now it makes sense. So obviously adapting to the changing times is a huge way to really flip your strategy and make it a little bit stronger than it is now. All right, so concluding, content marketing is constantly evolving. So even if your strategy is working great right now, even if your product or business hasn't been hit by COVID-19, it might not always be that way. And you need to always be ready for anything. There's variables that you can't change. So number one, stay agile and flexible. Be ready for change. Number two, if the signs are telling you that your content strategy isn't working, and you check off all those technical issues we went through on the checklist, it's time to make a shift. And number three, there's definitely not one size fits all solution to marketing or content strategies. So it's all about what works for a particular brand. So understanding who your brand is, who it's going to be during these times and in the future is a really important step. So that is all for today. We do have a Q&A after this. So if you have any questions, start popping them in that Q&A box, and I'll pull that up in a second. Like I said, my name is Rae Sturm, and I'm a digital content manager at Croud. I also have the details for Lana Hodgkinson, who is a content executive at Croud as well. So please get in touch. We would love to speak all things content and content strategy with you if you're interested in learning more. But I really want to thank everyone for coming today, and I really appreciate you guys starting your morning with me. All right, have a good day, everyone.